Welcome, everyone, to the Gardenerd Tip of the Week podcast, where experts from around the world talk shop, share stories, and offer their favorite tip. I'm your host, Christy Wilhelmi. This podcast was recorded in September of 2023. We start the new year with a continuation of our series of interviews with speakers from the Heirloom Expo in Ventura County, California. This week, my guest is Larry Santoyo. Larry has been a teacher and practitioner of permaculture design for the last 30 years and was mentored by Bill Mollison, the founding father of permaculture. Larry is the programs director at the Permaculture Academy and senior planner at Earthflow Design, his permaculture design and build firm in Los Angeles. Welcome to the podcast, Larry.
Thanks.
I'm really excited to talk to you. We met years ago, and I think it was maybe over building a cob bench somewhere. I don't remember.
The obligatory cob bench
Right, you have to build a
workshop.
cob bench somewhere.
Yeah.
And but we go way back, and I remember you invited me to take the first day of your permaculture design course, and that was as much time as I had, which I was
Well,
grateful
it's
to.
coming up again, so you could
I could come
spend
and
the
take it
weekend.
in.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, you said, "Well, there now you know everything about permaculture." So I thought that was pretty funny. Now, what I didn't know is that you had a career in law enforcement before being a permaculture guy that everyone in Los Angeles learns from. When was that?
When I was young, too young to know better, I guess, I was injured on duty, actually.
Really?
And part of the programming was that you get retrained, right? So the state retrained me in land use planning, and then you had to specialize in something. And I wanted to specialize in resource management, natural resource management. And I searched, around. This was in the 80s. I searched around for any kind of programs that I could request to go to, and I found Bill Mollison and a conference and several design courses taught by Bill Mollison. He was the only one teaching at the time. So I put in a training request for those, and the state sent me.
There it
So
was.
I thought they were just going to say okay to one, but they actually approved the whole package.
Like as like health insurance, where they approve
right.
some things but not others.
Yeah, exactly.
So that landed you in front of Bill Mollison.
Yeah, so we became friends, and I started working for him in like 80. I think we met in 85 or 86, and then started working with him in 89 and traveled with him. And yeah, and I never looked back. I mean, I actually don't know how to do anything else, so it's a good thing I'm stuck with
It's
it.
a good thing you do it well. I think that most people know, or at least have heard of, the principles of permaculture, but I think they're easy to forget because they're not, with all the distractions in the world, this permaculture thing feels foreign
Sure.
sometimes. So what do you think is the most important thing about permaculture for people to remember?
I think the most important thing is, and I'll probably say this a dozen times, about a dozen things.
Oh, fine.
But I think that the most important thing is to realize that permaculture, you don't do permaculture, you use permaculture
Right.
in what you do, right? Permaculture is a set of protocols. It's actually not about gardening, it's not about building, it's about how things connect, right? It's a decision-making protocols for problem solving, anything that can be designed, right? It's basically a set of protocols based on patterns of nature that are that assist with decision making and problem solving.
And our goal is to replicate those patterns.
Patterns that we see in nature, that we examine in nature. And the really cool thing is that the deeper we dive into understanding ecosystems, then we start to really get almost enamored and lost and down the rabbit hole of how different everything is managed. Like anywhere you go, an ecosystem, it manages itself in such different ways. But the fascinating thing is that in every single ecosystem, there's commonalities. And it's those commonalities that give rise to the permaculture design principles. So it's these threads that no matter where you are on the planet hold true, right? Principles of design derive directly from the commonalities of nature.
So give me a couple of those principles of design.
Well, if you were to go into the woods, all right, then no matter where we are, right, then there is, we start to observe not just where we are, but when we are,
Hmm.
right? So that we're looking at an event, a sequence of events that's been happening in this forest or in this grassland or whatever it is. There's a pattern of events, a model of natural succession. So that's one of the things that's a commonality, no matter where we are, right? There's a pattern and a sequence of events. Some things that set the stage for the next thing, that sets the stage for the next thing, right?
Right.
And when we use that as a metaphor or as a guideline, then we can think of things like, oh, we're demanding a climax forest out of this when we haven't really set the stage with all the
It's
nurse
it's
plants
still a
or the,
grassland.
yeah, it's still a grassland, so we
Yeah.
can't demand this out of it. And you could just like really use that as a metaphor for anything, like a relationship or a business or,
So many
I'm
people jump from
demanding,
grassland
yeah,
to forest
yeah,
before they've put in any
yeah.
perennial
So
shrubs.
people are, yeah, but it's true. It's like and then understanding that each ecosystem is unique because of a reason, right? And understanding that it's solving their issues this way because of what it has to deal with, extreme cold or extreme heat or extreme wet or whatever it is. So then
Yeah.
you just kind of extrapolate that and everything becomes fluid. So then you place yourself in that system and then you design accordingly, right? So there's and everything uses a natural process, right? So when we're designing, then I always try to ask people to think of how nature would do it, right? Instead of just like jumping to technology, even green technology, whatever
Yeah.
it is, it's still an energy trail that might not be needed or that we could reduce some way. Like I was just talking about how hot it is, right? If you shade a house, right, you could reduce the cooling load by 30%.
Yeah.
Just shade. And of course, that shade, if we're designing, let's not just put a tree, let's put a tree
That
that
bears
has
fruit.
fruit or
Yes.
timber or fiber or,
Yeah.
right? So now we're designers and
And provides habitat and
provides
pollinate
habitat
nectar. Yeah.
and, something that crosses something off of your list
Yeah.
of needs, right?
And stacking functions is another principle,
Yeah,
which,
it kind of ties right into that.
yeah.
Stacking is like is a thing that we see in nature where, just in one, arm full of stuff, there's a root layer and there's a crawly layer and then there's, herbal and, woody and herbaceous shrubs and then smaller trees and then bigger trees all in the same arm load in front of you, in a 3 foot circle, and it all kind of stacks up together and it's different over time. So one of the principles is stacking in space and time, right? That things will evolve or, and you could look at that literally like as we're designing a landscape, right?
Yeah.
Something for the fall or something for the
Yeah.
evening or, right? Or use it as a principle for all kinds of design. Like I opened up a restaurant, a cafe,
You
and
did?
we had, right, we
Wait,
had
wait, you have a
so we
cafe?
so we had artwork on the walls,
Mhm.
right, that decorated the cafe, but it was also for sale, an independent autonomous person doing that, but it enhanced our place, right?
Mhm.
So connecting these things, and we weren't open at night, so we leased out the kitchen so that people could make, sauces and dressings and, and they didn't have to build a health code approved kitchen because we already had it. So
Oh, that's great.
stacking, but not necessarily plants and animals.
Right.
It's just it's a design system that uses natural patterns, and we kind of make that translation to every kind of and any kind of medium that can be designed.
Yeah. It feels like the right thing to do.
Yeah,
Um,
if otherwise it would be wrong shui.
wrong shui.
Yeah,
I love that.
it'd feel bad. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I think I'm repeating what you've just said. You often stress that these principles apply to every aspect of life, not gardening or design. So,
Yeah.
and you've just said how you saw it manifesting in the world. How else, like lately, have you seen it
I think
manifesting in
that
the world?
on a broad scale, stuff's happening too. And I think that the doomsdayers are having a harder and harder time because it's the future is abundant once we start putting our mind to it and really thinking of all the ways that we use resources. And now that it's become, I teach at universities all over, and it's a thing where people are working hard to try to resource loop everything. How can it be used more? How can it be used again? And I'm talking about on a municipal scale.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really,
It's the
it really is sort of the future, thinking, right? That is, it's already happening.
it's the concept of cradle to cradle
Sure.
in
Right.
design,
Right.
where everything gets recycled or reused or repurposed and doesn't
Right.
end
Right.
up in a landfill.
Yeah. Exactly.
That
And
kind
when
of
I'm
thing.
emperor, then everything will be
Emperor.
either forever recyclable or, you know,
Compostable.
compostable. Yeah.
Yeah, really compostable,
Yeah.
not just
And
bioplastics.
I was faked out by some of that
Oh
stuff
yeah,
too.
well, we all
That,
were.
yeah, it doesn't break down in the ocean
Nope.
where it's necessary, it's more
Yeah,
necessary. And
yeah.
then it's like, why do we even need that stuff to begin with?
I wish we
Just
didn't.
questioning all of that.
It's a good idea to question all of that. Now, speaking of questioning that, so a lot of gardeners are concerned about pests,
Yeah,
and they, whip out the bug spray or whatever.
sure,
So, but
sure.
you've talked about this concept that the problem is the solution. And I quote you all the time in my classes when you've said, you don't have a grasshopper problem, you have a turkey shortage.
Right.
So
A
let's dive
turkey
into that. The
deficiency.
turkey
Yeah.
deficiency. Let's
The
talk about
the
that.
problem is the solution. It was something that Bill Mollison taught me, and it took me a while to get my head wrapped around it. But it's really just basically thinking about an issue or a perceived problem, right? And it's a problem because of where we're standing. It's a problem because of how we're looking at it. Like grasshoppers, they're a problem if they're eating your grass if you're a rancher. But if just shuffle your resources a little bit, and instead of, promoting your cattle this year, let's bring in turkeys and, convert these grasshoppers into poultry,
And protein. Yeah.
free range, organic, homeschooled turkeys, a lot more,
Homeschool.
money than, make more money than any,
Then you
and
could. Yeah.
then phase it out, right? So that's the other thing is remaining flexible. Something that we've learned recently, practically the whole world is to pivot,
Yeah.
and those that did are successful.
Yeah.
And it's another clue from nature.
And it really comes down to balance as well, is structuring your ecosystem so that you have enough good guys to eat the bad guys
Right,
and all
right.
that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And it's a matter of, you look at where pests arise, and, it's there's some kind of something that isn't being met, right? Or it just maybe it's we need to give up on it. It's like there's a point where you get to, like one of my design methodologies is shoot the hostage. Okay, it's like you get it. What hostage situation?
Right.
Just like stop trying to make a bad design better. At a
Yes.
certain point, you just gotta like just get to the point where you're just gonna stop trying to do that and move on to something that makes more sense.
Giving up is sometimes the right solution.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It,
How
it kind of
hard is
ties
that?
into that. Well, it ties into that. The paralysis of analysis. You read so much, or you get all this information. You're just like, no, I can't do anything because I know too much. Or
Yeah.
there's also a funny saying about how you know uh, good decisions come with experience, and you know experience that comes from bad
Bad
decisions.
decisions.
Yeah.
Right. I was interviewing someone earlier in this show that was talking about uh, farming as a lesson in failure, and how, get really good at failure
Oh yeah,
in
yeah,
order to
yeah.
get really good at
Good
farming.
yeah,
And
that's being successful. Yeah,
exactly.
right, right.
I think that's hard to hold on
It's
to
hard to
for
hold on
people.
to, but I think that once you let go of how it should be and really focus on how it is, like I was
I'm
just
gonna
talking about,
cry.
like, oh, you're coming into gardening, new gardeners coming up to me saying, "Oh, I'm just starting. I love it." I go, "Well, you better love the bad days too." I mean, you have to love the grit. You have to love the bugs that come because, you're going to start learning more about bugs more than you ever thought.
Right, right.
Especially in Southern California in the last couple of years, we've had everything.
All the bugs.
All the bugs that come out of, the
Yeah,
woodwork
I
because
know.
they're stressed and, so it's just a matter of finding that balance, right?
Yeah, and I know when the pandemic hit and lockdown happened, all of the breeding cycles sped up exponentially because we were out of the way.
Yeah,
And
right,
so we
right.
ended up with a shit ton, pardon my language, but we ended up with a lot more rats and
Yeah,
gophers and squirrels than
like
we
there
ever
was
had.
three life cycles every year
Yeah,
instead of just two.
yeah. It
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
they weren't interrupted
yeah,
by
right,
us.
right, right.
So what are you working on these days?
Oh, I am working on, well, the relentless pursuit of new clients and new students.
Okay.
And then, uh, but I've got a couple projects, one in Malibu where we've got some nice gardens set up. And again, it takes a few years that people don't realize, that it's really going to be a few years before there's any kind of yield. It's like, this is real life, this is nature. Yes, there are bugs, there are deer, there are rabbits, there are, so it's like learning all those patterns and not just learning them for the garden, but how to communicate what to expect
Yeah.
is part of that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been building gardens and designing stuff for 30 years. So I think in every direction we could go and visit somebody's garden and eat eat really well.
Stuff from
Yeah,
their
yeah.
gardens. Now, I have something I want to discuss with you. There's a little bit of a prickly issue.
Uh-huh.
I think with me, um, half the time, not half the time, there are times when somebody fresh out of permaculture school will
Yeah.
find themselves in my garden or one of my clients' gardens, and
I'm
they
sorry.
thumb their nose at the raised beds.
Oh,
They thumb their nose at the raised beds because they have right angles, which nature does
oh.
not have, and it's this kind of altered environment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they're so used to hearing about permaculture having these natural flow of things and then
Oh,
raised
oh,
beds.
oh.
But I want to flip open the book that Toby Hemingway wrote and point to
Yeah.
the raised bed diagrams that he has in his book and say stuff like, like
Yeah, I
it's
think that just
okay.
like everything, that you don't need to defend it.
Yeah,
No, I'm serious.
yeah,
It's like there because the pattern of not understanding what you see in this garden is not permaculture.
ah,
Okay. But the pattern of recognizing that you see some value in the way you have designed and set up your your workflow is for you to decide.
right.
It's not for me. I could suggest, oh, if you built it like this, then you could reach every corner, right? And it's like, yeah, that's not important to me right now because I have these boxes, or I like the aesthetic of this, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
We design, we arrive at solutions based on who's participating. We never impose a solution,
got it.
right? Just because it's curvilinear as opposed to this, or it like you don't just put swales in. You do it because it's necessary.
Right. Swales are a good idea.
Yeah, right. And the thing that people get stuck on is that they don't have experience yet,
Yeah.
right? And they have more ideas than actual experience because some of the stuff that we talk about is it's just not going to be for them, right? Even that they want it,
Mhm.
and again it's like it's practicing something that doesn't need to be practiced. You're trying to impose something instead of arriving at a solution,
Yeah.
right? So yeah,
Okay.
the other thing, there's certain things, right, that just kind of make more sense, right?
Right.
Right? And raised beds, if you're, if you need it neat, if you want it raised up because you can't bend
Like
over, or
mobility
this, or
issues
yeah,
or
all kinds
yeah,
of stuff, right? And like from, I don't know, like 40 degrees and south, maybe we need to
latitude.
start thinking about, yeah, we need to start thinking about basins, right?
Yes.
Digging pits and
Trenches.
and
Growing in the
growing
trenches.
things in pits, and just like saucer gardens instead of raised beds. Raised beds are great in the Pacific Northwest where it's the walkways are all rainy and wet,
Right.
right? You want a raised bed that'll kind of
Yeah.
dry out a little bit, but you've got all of that exposure, right? The curve linear of the profile of a raised bed, right, is evaporating down
Yeah.
here.
You
So if
do
we
have
did
to
the
water more
opposite,
often.
right?
Yeah.
There's 900-year-old gardens in the Southwest that are waffle gardens,
Right.
that are pits, so that the wind blows or anything, just falls into there. The water washes in and helps the garden. Plus, it's shaded a little bit and out of the wind a little bit.
Yeah, and that is how I've always planted my squash, because the theory is, they always
Yeah,
say
yeah.
plant your
The
squash on a
mound
berm
thing.
or a mound.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
no, that's
yeah,
where clay soil that doesn't drain, but in sandy soil you need to plant it in
yeah.
a ditch.
And it's where you got summer rain too,
Right.
right? And
Weird.
yeah,
Weird summer
yeah,
rains.
yeah. What is that?
We had a hurricane come through. It was very odd. So, okay, thank you for saying that, because I know
Yeah,
a lot of the time I'm using raised beds to problem solve poor soil that have
yeah.
like toxic chemicals in it,
Exactly,
stuff like
exactly.
that.
Yeah, in New York City, we sheet mulched the ground with broken concrete and then brought in truckloads of compost
On
and
top.
built our gardens on top of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And we also have issues with tree roots infesting
sure.
veggie beds, because that's where all the water is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So
So
it's like, hey, there's water over there.
yeah,
Yeah,
so I run into people every once in a while who are like, I want to grow in the ground. I'm like, have you tested for lead,
yeah,
arsenic,
right.
and zinc? Because
Yeah,
those
yeah.
are the things that are gonna either kill you or prevent your stuff from growing.
Right, right. If you're, lactating or over 70 years old, you really need to you really need to think about that.
Yeah,
Or if you're under 40 pounds,
yeah,
you can't have your kids around that.
yeah.
And most urban areas that
Have those
have
things in them.
those things,
Yeah,
right? And it's, you know, you can wash some of it off. You can do, there's things that you could do, but there's also things you could do to just like prevent it, like raise
raised
beds.
beds.
Right. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
All right. Well,
The,
I'm
the
glad you
other
got that.
issues
Yeah.
though about raised beds are people in Southern California are big into like doing hugelkultures,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
really designed for a wet
Wet environments.
environment,
Thank you for
right?
saying that.
Because the idea is that the logs will rot under a pile of soil, but that doesn't happen in dry lands.
Nope.
We could bury logs if we want to preserve them.
I know.
You know,
Come back 15 years later.
yeah,
It's
they're
still
still
gonna be
there.
there.
There,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Exactly. All right.
So it's
Thank
like
you.
again, it's like not imposing a solution just because it's hip. Oh, it was in the Eco Hipster magazine. We have to do this, right?
Right.
It's like that's such bull. It's such BS,
Yeah.
right? You arrive at solutions depending on where you are, when you are, and who's participating.
That is great to keep in mind.
Yeah.
All right. It is tip time.
Tip time.
Do you have a favorite tip you want to share with the Gardenerd audience?
I am inspired to and reminded to say about saving seeds,
Okay.
right? That, like especially tomato seeds, which are pretty easy to save, right? And it you if you don't know, you get tomato seeds, you put them in a pint of water and you shake it up and you leave it for a few days. It gets nasty.
It gets really gross.
It gets nasty, but you scrape that off and throw it away. And when the seeds separate from the jelly stuff after a few days,
Yeah.
they'll drop down and you save those seeds, right? And label them. But what I was going to say for the tip was to start collecting the first fruit to ripen and the last fruit to ripen.
So
And pretty
smart.
soon you're going to develop a strain for your place that is early and late. So it's like, and you could name it after yourself.
That's amazing, Larry. I know that is one of those things that you have to just keep remembering, because I forget
it's
it all the
fun
time.
too. It's
Yeah.
fun too. Yeah.
That's a great tip. Thank you so much, Larry.
You're very, very welcome.
And how do people find you online?
I am not a hard man to track. Permacultureacademy.com and earthflow.com.
Earthflow.
And
Awesome.
I'm on Instagram and you can follow me there.
Okay. All right, garden nerds. You'll find a link to the Permaculture Academy this week at Gardenerd.com. We'll also share a link to Larry's social media and more info about his upcoming classes.
Yay.
That's it for this week. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Visit us for tons of free gardening information at Gardenerd.com. Consider becoming a Patreon subscriber to support all the free stuff we do here at Garden Nerd. You'll find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter on Garden Nerd 1, on Facebook as GardenNerd.com, and of course, our Garden Nerd YouTube channel. Happy gardening!